Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited about this topic. We had a chance to get to know each of our speakers last night, and we have a great lineup today. Each of them is so passionate about these topics. I think that you will be very pleased when you leave today how much you've learned and how much you can carry into your career. So I just want to thank each of you one more time for coming. I'm going to turn it over to Will to lead prayer for the day, and then we're going to go ahead and get started with our first panel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Will Palmer. I'm currently the editor-in-chief of the Law Review here. And just on behalf of the Law Review, all the staffers, the faculty and staff here at Regent, we are just incredibly thankful that you all are here, and we're thankful for the opportunity to dive into such a great topic. We are all very excited with what the speakers have prepared for today, and we're hoping that you all are ready to participate as well throughout the different Q&A sessions that we'll have. I'm going to pray for us, and we're going to get started. Lord, thank you so much for all that you are and all that you do. Thank you for bringing us together. Thank you for this opportunity to dive in to such an important topic in our field. Thank you for each speaker and all the safe travels that you provided to bring them here, Lord. We ask your blessing on this event, on every PowerPoint slide, on every word, on every interaction, and we pray all these things in your Son's name. Amen.
Good morning.
My name is Nat Gant. I'm a professor and associate dean here at the law school, and it's my pleasure to moderate this first panel. When Sarah Nelson came to me several months ago, thinking about an idea for a symposium, she mentioned the topic of mental health. I was personally very excited for her to pursue it. As some of you know in this room, because you've had me in class or interacted with me before, this is a topic that's personally very important to me because it is such an issue in the legal profession. So I'm going to spend a few minutes as we begin, and actually the PowerPoint is before you, to lay a groundwork just for a few minutes before I introduce the speakers that we have in the first panel. This is a great lineup. Overall, just a wonderful lineup the entire day, and I do want to thank the Law Review for putting this together. I know it's a lot of work to bring all the speakers together, but I trust that you have an enjoyable experience. But let's get started on the first panel. And the first panel is mental health within the legal profession. And I want to begin by particularly coming at this from the perspective of a legal educator. And of course, I am a lawyer, but also a legal educator. And take us back in this room to 2007. Some of us in this room will have heard of these reports, but some of us will not. There were two very important reports that came out in 2007 on the state of legal education. I have the images before you. Educating Lawyers, published by the Carnegie Report, and Best Practices for Legal Education, published by the Clinical Legal Education Association. And both of those reports talked about the good things that are happening in legal education and the things that need improvement. And in the Carnegie Report, Carnegie identified 3 apprenticeships that law schools, legal educators should do to train their students to succeed in the legal profession. The first was the cognitive apprenticeship, which is we need to train our students, educate them to think like lawyers, to be good problem solvers. And they said law schools, check, A plus even on that, right? That's your signature pedagogy. That's the thing that you do well. They said, secondly, we need to train students in the skills that are important for the practice of law. The counseling skills, the negotiation skills, the writing skills. And Carnegie said, law schools, you're working on that. And again, this is about 11 years ago, but there's a lot more work to be done. I think since then, law schools have done a lot of work in this area. The ABA has actually changed some of its standards as it relates to legal education, but you're doing some work on that. The third apprenticeship, which was, in my mind, most revelatory, and one that has related to Professor Ben Madison and I have done some work and started our Center for Ethical Formation, is law schools, you need to train your students or educate your students in developing a professional identity. And professional identity is more than professionalism. Probably most of us in this room have heard the term professionalism. Professional identity runs deeper. And the Carnegie Report challenged us to help our students to develop a moral compass so that they can make good ethical decisions and have a balanced life as lawyers. And I wanted to show you, I know there's a lot of text on some of these slides, but wanted to show you again, taking you back to 2007, about 11 years ago, why did the Carnegie Report say that we as law schools were failing in helping our students to develop a professional identity? Well, they looked at how lawyers were doing in the profession. This is a quote from Deborah Rohde, who is one of the foremost legal ethicists. She's a professor at Stanford Law School. Or it's a quote from her book. This is a quote directly from Educating Lawyers. In her book, In the Interest of Justice, Deborah Rohde reviews survey data showing that the public perceives lawyers as greedy, unethical, and arrogant. She also notes that a majority of lawyers report that they would choose another career if they had the decision to make over, and 3/4 would not want their children to become lawyers. In addition, an estimated 1/3 of American attorneys suffer from depression or from alcohol or drug addiction, a rate that is 2 to 3 times higher than the public generally. Of course, there are reasons for lawyers' dissatisfaction with their work, but lack of a sense of meaning is one central concern. Only 1/5 of attorneys report that their careers have borne out their hope of contributing to the social good. This is a report that was in 2007, but the book itself was published in 2000. This is 20 years ago. And the Carnegie report, the Carnegie Foundation looked at these studies and said, what do all lawyers share? They all have been through law school. And what is law school doing to contribute to this problem? And so as a legal educator, I've been particularly interested because we have a role to play in promoting good health, wellness, not just among law students, but among lawyers as well. And I wanted to show you also, before I turn it over to the panelists and introduce them, this was again in 2007 with the Carnegie report. Fast forward to 2017, last year, and I'm sure all the panelists are very familiar with the report that's in front of you. The National Task Force on Lawyer Well-Being, a very comprehensive report by the ABA and others about lawyer well-being. So in 2000, there were problems with the legal profession. 2017, after the Carnegie report, after all these efforts towards the promotion of good health and wellness in the legal profession, where are we now? This is just a year ago. Again, no, kind of a long quote here, but I just want to read this to you. In 2016, so the report came out in 2017, but it was based on a 2016 study. The American Bar Association Commission on Lawyer Assistance Programs and the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation published their study of nearly 13,000 currently practicing lawyers, a very comprehensive study. It found that between 21 and 36% qualify as problem drinkers, and that approximately 28%, 19%, and 23% are struggling with some level of depression, anxiety, and stress, respectively. The parade of difficulties also includes suicide, social alienation, work addiction, sleep deprivation, job satisfaction, a diversity crisis, complaints of work-life conflict, incivility, a narrowing of values so that profit predominates, and negative public perception. Wow, I feel like I'm being a downer as we begin. This is the state of the profession that we are so concerned about, though. And unfortunately, the problem doesn't just resonate with lawyers. It also resonates with law students, which is many of you in this room. 15 law schools and over 3,300 law students participated in a survey of law student well-being in 2016, so this is relatively recent data. It found that 17% experienced some level of depression, 14% experienced severe anxiety, 23% had mild or moderate anxiety, and 6% reported serious suicidal thoughts in the past year. As to alcohol use, 43% reported binge drinking at least once in the prior 2 weeks, and nearly 1/4, 22%, reported binge drinking 2 or more times during that period. 1/4 fell into the category of being at risk for alcoholism, for which further screening was recommended. So this is, again, the state of the profession and the state of legal education. These gentlemen have put a lot of time and energy into ameliorating this problem. So I'm going to introduce each of them and turn it over to them. I'm going to introduce all of them in the beginning, and then they will go in order. We changed up the order a little bit. They can blame me for this. I changed up the order from the program, but I'm, again, excited and look forward to what they will share with us this morning. So let me introduce them. Now, I want to tell you that they told me to be brief in the introduction. So, you know, it's hard with such distinguished people. They give you long bios, a full page of biographical information. But I will just hit the highlights for you. So first will be Jim Leffler. Jim Leffler is a licensed professional counselor, so the non-lawyer in the group, which is always a welcome perspective. a licensed professional counselor who joined Virginia Lawyers Helping Lawyers as the Mental Health Services Coordinator in January 2004. He assumed the role of Executive Director of Lawyers Helping Lawyers in December 2005. And he relinquished that role as Executive Director to become Clinical Director in August 2015. Mr. Leffler, Jim, has extensive experience in the field of chemical dependency and mental health. And one thing that was interesting to me about his bio is it indicates that the staggering number of attorneys that commit suicide was an interest that led Mr. Leffler, that led Jim into being concerned about mental health in the legal profession. Mr. Leffler, Jim, is received his undergraduate and graduate degrees from VCU and has been licensed since 1990. Let's welcome Jim Leffler. I'm just going to have everyone clap, and then I'll call them all up. Next is going to be Leonard Heath. Len is a partner in the firm of Heath, Overby, and Vesser and Old, PLC, located in Newport News. He currently serves as the president of the Virginia State Bar, the state agency that licenses and governs, and this is an interesting fact, approximately 32,000 lawyers who are in good standing across the Commonwealth of Virginia. Len has extensive experience in trying cases across Virginia in both state and federal courts. And of personal interest, his son is a current student here at the law school. Len received his undergraduate and law degrees from the College of William and Mary. And Len has also a very personal interest in lawyer wellness, has been on the forefront of different initiatives. I've had the pleasure of working on a current State Bar Committee on lawyer wellness. So let's welcome Leonard Heath. Next is Marc Palmer. Marc serves as Professionalism Counsel under the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism to facilitate the promotion of professionalism, civility, and integrity among lawyers and judges in Illinois. Prior to joining the commission, Marc spent a decade in private practice as a trial attorney, primarily focused on commercial litigation, banking, and municipal law. Marc is experienced in civil and criminal cases at the state and federal levels, all while striving to preserve a commitment to the rule of law and justice. Marc received his undergraduate degree from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and his law degree from the John Marshall Law School in Chicago. One thing I will add, I noticed in reviewing Marc's longer bio on the web is he served as a police officer for a year, correct? Prior to going to law school. So let's welcome Marc Palmer. And then finally, John Berry. John Berry serves as the Florida Bar's Legal Division Director, supervising the lawyer regulation and professionalism efforts of the Florida Bar. Prior to returning to the Florida Bar, he served as the Executive Director of the State Bar of Michigan from 2000 to 2006. Before joining the State Bar of Michigan in November 2000, he served as the Director of the Center of Professionalism at the University of Florida's Levin College of Law. He also has held positions with the bars in Arizona and earlier with the Florida Bar as well. In addition to his efforts with state bars, Mr. Berry is very active with the American Bar Association and the National Organization of Bar Counsel, and actually received in 2001 the ABA's Michael Frank Award, which is awarded the highest award given nationally by the ABA for achievement in the field of lawyer ethics, professionalism, and conduct. He received his BA in political science from the University of Florida and his JD from Stetson College of Law in 1976. I squeezed in the date there, Mr. Berry. Didn't mean to do that, but it was on the bio when I read it. So,
they could tell.
so
they could
let
tell
you
it's
know,
been a
let
while.
you know the age there. Let's welcome Mr. Berry. And again, let's welcome all of our panelists, and I'll start with Jim.
Is this on? Yeah, okay. God, I really hate having to talk at the beginning of a panel like this because I wish the prayer would have said something about not having boring speakers, because I think that would have helped. I will say that this job that I have is the best job I've ever had. I have been working with attorneys for about 15 years now. And I'll tell you, the job interview included me doing a presentation to the Board of Lawyers Helping Lawyers on depression in the legal profession. And prior to that time, I really didn't know a lot about it. The way I heard about the job is I started in adolescent drug court with Hanover County, just north of Richmond. And one of our volunteers had actually been an attorney that had gone through some alcoholism treatment with me, and told me about the job. And he said, "You'll like this job. You know, it's kind of fun." And I didn't really have a good time working with the counselors that were at the Community Services Board, but I loved probation officers. So when I was joining lawyers, helping lawyers, the mission up until that time had been the mission statement basically said helping attorneys with substance abuse issues, and they knew they needed to change the mission because there'd been a number of studies like the one that was mentioned showing the amount of depression and suicide in the legal profession. And so they didn't know a whole lot about it either. A lot of my treatment history had been with addiction and with dual diagnosis folks. So anyway, when I did this study, it just blew me away. There have always been studies there have been a number of studies that have been done on the professions with the most depression and suicide, and generally it had always been lawyers, dentists, and doctors. And it would depend, there were about 6 or 7 of them that I looked at, and it depended on which study, which one was number one. Well, the Center for Disease Control did a really, really big study just a few years ago. And for some reason, lawyers fell to fourth. I've always known how competitive lawyers are, and I don't understand how they let pharmacists slide in above them, but they did. But it's still an incredible issue that suicide is such a big deal among the legal profession. There was a study done in the 90s of Canadian attorneys, and the third leading cause of death of Canadian attorneys after heart disease and cancer was suicide. So yeah, once I read all those studies, I decided that one of the first things I needed to do when I took this job was to get a certification on suicide prevention, and that is one of the first things I did. And I've done a number of trainings, both in the state of Virginia and actually one with the ABA on suicide prevention. It's an incredibly sad thing. One of the things I do when I talk at a number of different bar groups is ask how many people have known an attorney that's committed suicide. And frequently it's 50 to 60% of the people in the rooms can raise their hand because they've known someone who's committed suicide. The longer you're in the profession, the better chance that you're going to find someone. Although one of the law schools in Virginia actually had 2 students commit suicide the year before last. So why do lawyers have such big issues with substance abuse and mental health? I was talking with somebody right before this, and they asked me that question. I think some of it starts from the first week you're in law school. What happens the first week you're in law school is you find out you're never going to catch up. You're never going to catch up. You're going to have more work to do. You're never going to get all your reading done. You're never going to be 100% prepared for anything. There are always going to be questions that you can't answer. And that's really difficult for a lot of people who have kind of breezed through school before they get to law school. The other people have always been in the top 10, 25% of the class. After that first semester, only a quarter of them are in the top 25% of the class. And that's a huge ego insult for people who have always used their academic performance as something to really help build their self-esteem. And so it kind of starts right then. For a lot of people, all of a sudden what they've always counted on is being the smartest in the class is not there for them anymore. Personally, I also believe that the way people that are attorneys frequently utilize to deal with the stress of the world is they read. The intellectual people that are very, very verbal frequently do that as an escape. And in law school, people do not read to escape anymore because they don't have the time or the energy to read. Perhaps summer vacation, and maybe over Christmas they'll read something that's historical or biographical or a novel. But that one big thing that they've always used to feel good, to kind of escape from reality in a healthy way, they kind of lose. So that's why I think that's part of the reason why the rates of depression and anxiety become so great starting in law school. Then, I also believe that people that come to law school People that want to be attorneys are people that want to help people. I think a very few percentage of the people that come to law school are doing it to make a lot of money. They may think of that as an added benefit until they actually find out how many lawyers actually do make a lot of money. But I think almost everybody that comes to law school, everyone that wants to be an attorney wants to help people. Well, there's a flip side to that, is that, lawyers as people that want to help people do look at themselves as helpers, not helpees. So, they want to help other people, but they also don't feel really comfortable about people helping them. There's also something that kind of starts off in law school, that there's a myth that if you get any kind of mental health counseling in law school, the state bar or the board of bar examiners is not going to license you. I've heard that in every law school that I've ever been to, and it's never been true. The boards of bar examiners across the country look at it as a mature thing to do if you're anxious or depressed, that you get help for doing it. But once that kind of myth permeates, it also permeates in society. Getting any kind of help is viewed as being weak. The last thing an attorney can afford to be is being seen as being weak. They feel that people will take advantage of them and that kind of thing. So I think that goes along. In Virginia, we've done a couple studies just on Virginia attorneys, and one of the things we found, the first one was done in 2008, and the second one we did was in 2014. Actually, of the people that we surveyed, about 16% of the people that are currently licensed as attorneys have had some kind of mental health diagnosis and or help. And I thought that was truly amazing and truly great. That people are recognizing it enough that they are willing to get the help that they... 16%, which is considerably higher than you'd expect from most professions. But I think it's just a small number of people with the legal profession when you look at the numbers that Professor Gant just talked about. The legal profession, you put any organism under stress and they're not going to function as well. The legal profession is incredibly stressful. No matter what kind of job you have in the legal profession, you're dealing with somebody's or some things, important things, property, money, liberty. All of those things are important to be dealing with, and the people that you're working with always have really unrealistic expectations about what you're going to be able to do for them. So generally, clients, no matter whether it's an entity or a person, are never going to be happy with you for one reason or another. Either they're not going to be happy with the result that you get, or they're going to think you charge them too much money for the result that you got. And that's aside from how society has always kind of looked at lawyers in kind of a negative way, starting with Shakespeare, where he says, that famous quote, "Let's kill all the lawyers." I think lawyers have always had some kind of perception of not dealing from the top of the deck a lot of the times. But it's especially in the United States. I can remember, when I was a kid, I think lawyers did get more respect than they have even today. And I think that's kind of a sad thing. Another thing about just generally in the practice of law is how little control you have over so many things. You can't control what the judge is going to do. You can't control your client. You can't control lots of things that go into practicing law and in your job, and you can't control the people that are going to be on the other side. So, one of the things they talk about as good mental health is having an internal locus of control, where you feel like you really do have the ability to make changes. Well, a lot of times in practicing law, you do have, that internal locus of control that you think you can really do a lot of things, and then for some reason that you can't sometimes even understand or explain, things don't go the way they were supposed to go. So all of those things, I think, impact on what's going on with an attorney and how difficult it is to practice the law. That doesn't even include the amount of debt that's accumulated today in the educational system. You know, people generally, most people that graduate from a graduate program now owe almost as much as owning a house, and they frequently have the cost of a mortgage each month to pay off for 15 or 20 years after they graduate from law school. You know, that adds an incredible amount of stress as well. So I'm glad that we're starting to do things like Nat talked about as far as doing that study. I think Len's going to talk about some really great things the State Bar is doing today. And I'm just really glad that this is getting out in the open and people are really talking about these things. You know, none of this stuff is a surprise for people that have been doing it, but I think all of it's a surprise, or a lot of it for a lot of lawyers and a lot of people in the general community. These statistics are alarmingly high. Anyway, thanks for listening. I appreciate it.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. There you go. I always start out on my talks when I talk about wellness by making this statement. I love being a lawyer. I can't imagine doing anything else. And so particularly for the law students, and how many law students do we have here today? If you raise your hand. Okay, great. I'm glad to see you here this morning. Particularly for the law students, when you hear this, the information itself can sometimes cause anxiety and depression. But take it in stride, because what we're trying to do is start the discussion of warning you on the risks of the practice of law, because if you know about it, then there are things you can do to mitigate and avoid. Sometimes you can't cure it, but sometimes you can at least mitigate some of these risks. I can't imagine doing anything else. My dad was a roofer. I'm very proud of him. He put me on the roof young. I'll tell you, my mother died when I was 10. I'll tell you that not to make you feel bad, but to explain what I'm about to say. When I was 12, I was going to work with him over the summers, and that's so he could keep an eye on me. By the time I was 14, I was working every day on the roof. By the time I was 18, I was a sheet metal mechanic. And I worked with folks that every day got out and worked out in the hard weather. I mean, in the summertime, it would be 100 degrees, and that's not on the roof. And we were working with hot asphalt at 450 degrees. We were working at high roofs, working in a very dangerous environment. I have the great joy today of every Friday, except for today, going to lunch with my dad and his older brother. My dad's 80, and his older brother, my uncle, is 90. I asked him one day, I said, how many roofers in your lifetime committed suicide? He said, I have to think about that. And so I came back the next week and I said, did you think about it? He said, I did. He said, none. And I thought to myself, that is a very hard occupation. And I worked with folks that my last day on the roof, it was 104 degrees at the Williamsburg Candle Factory, working up against a white wall, flashing down at the bottom so there's no wind and the sun is reflecting off of it. When I stood up at 2 o'clock and I looked around, I was working with guys that were in their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, and one guy who was in his early 70s. There was no retirement plan for them. And they had started the day in blue uniforms, and they had white salt. They'd taken, back then, Gatorade had just come out, but you usually took salt to maintain the balance within your body. And so they had white shirts. And I thought to myself as I was looking around, and literally I took what I call a Kodak moment, Kodak picture. I said, if you ever get tired of studying or practicing law, remember this day. And I still do. And my father today is fond of saying, I put him on the roof young and made a good lawyer out of him. So again, I can't imagine doing anything else. We are the only profession mentioned in the Constitution. It drives the doctors crazy. But I start with that so that you know how much I do love doing what I do. With that said, why am I so passionate about it? Well, one, the love of the profession. Two, I really like being around lawyers. They're all in all really good people. I started a law firm in 1986. If you took a snapshot of that firm in 1987, there were 25 attorneys. I left that firm 4 years after I started practicing to become a named partner in another firm. That firm then disbanded in the late 90s. Flash forward to today, if you looked at the people in that firm in 1987, there were 25 attorneys. 2 have committed suicide. I can't understand that. And when it happened, people around them said, I had no idea. Nobody saw it coming. And these were not only excellent attorneys, but they're really wonderful people. And so with that as a background, when it was clear that I was in line to become president of the Virginia State Bar, and then all of a sudden, in August of 2017, the stars and the planets all aligned, and this report came out. As you can tell, I'm passionate about this particular topic. Not only that, I have a vested interest now in the profession because my son, Jordan, raise your hand. I embarrass him all the time. He is a third year here, so I want to make sure we get the profession right. I'm going to touch on something that, a couple of things that Jim mentioned before I get into my presentation. The studies that have come out, and this is important for the law students, the studies that have come out show that a lot of these mental health issues start to arise as early as the second year of law school. And I think there's a reason for that. There are a number of reasons for that. Again, the people that go to law school have always done well. They're competitive. And I just spoke at Liberty Law School a few weeks ago, and they were just getting their first year class. I was the inaugural lecture in professionalism. They were getting ready to get their midterms, their first midterm grade, and I cautioned them, and I said, at the end of your first semester, half of you are 50% of you are going to be in the bottom half of the class. There's no way around that. And that doesn't mean that's the end of your career. I can tell you, at the end of my first semester, I was in the bottom half of my class. Law school is just the beginning of your career. So you need to kind of keep your feet on the ground. When I talk to my son, he'll confirm this. I never ask him, are you studying hard enough? I'll never ask him, were you at the library long enough? The question is, have you gotten any exercise? Have you gotten out and gotten some fresh air? Because that's what you really need to have. Because you're getting ready to go into a profession, while it's wonderful, it is very stressful. About 10 years ago, I was driving down the road with my wife, and I'm driving, and she's sitting over beside me, and I love her. She is now today a board-certified behavioral analyst. She works with autistic children. She's licensed by the Board of Medicine. I am extremely proud of her. As we're going down the road, this is before she had gone back to grad school, and she said, we're talking about a friend who was going into psychology, and she said, I can't imagine going into psychology. Can you imagine being in a profession where every day you're listening to somebody's problems? And I'm driving and I'm going. And then she looked, and you could see the light. She said, oh, I never thought of it that way. And that's really what we do. That's our job is to deal with other people's problems. And if we can't take care of our own self, we can't take care of other people. So with that said, when the report came out, key pieces of information to Virginia. One of the co-authors of that report was Don Lemons, our Chief Justice, who is very passionate. He's as passionate about this as I am. We also have a connection with Chris Newbold, who is with ALPS, our state-endorsed malpractice carrier, and I've known Chris now for about 8 years. And Katie Houston, who, by the way, I stole Katie's materials today for my written portion dealing with vicarious trauma. It was also on that panel. So we're very proud of the Virginia connection. The biggest issue is to get people talking about the issue, which we've been doing this year, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. But in Virginia, we also like to get things done. So I'm proud to say that as of this week, before this week I was going to say all these proposals were currently pending in front of the Supreme Court. I can tell you as of this week, all of these proposals have now been adopted by the Virginia Supreme Court and are part of our regulation. First, we amended Rule 1.1 which deals with competence. We amended the comment to Rule 1.1, and we added in language that says, to be a competent lawyer, you have to be a well lawyer. You have to have taken care of yourself. It's in the comment. It's not in the rule. Why is that important? If it's in the comment, it's not. You can't be disciplined for it. So if you're not taking care of yourself, are we going to bring you up for charges before the bar? No. But it is important enough to have it in the comments. We have also amended two of our other rules dealing with how we deal with impaired lawyers. The first is we have allowed for lawyers that are in front of the disciplinary process to move if they're impaired, and it's a permanent impairment, to voluntarily take a permanent retirement. And you might say, well, why would you let somebody off? Well, you treat somebody differently who has been practicing for 45 years and has had no problems, and now they have Alzheimer's. And that is what's brought them in front of the disciplinary process. So you treat them differently. The other thing is you treat them differently than somebody who's been practicing for 3 years and they just stole $2 million from their trust account. The latter, you want out of the pool. The former, you understand what's going on and you want to allow them to retire with dignity. Another thing that we've done is we've allowed in our disciplinary process for information to go from the disciplinary folks to lawyers helping lawyers. Our disciplinary process is very confidential. In fact, I don't even know who is up in that process. The only time I find out, I do get an email once a decision is made, and I see who's been disciplined. But it is that confidential. And until this rule change, our disciplinary folks could not share information with lawyers helping lawyers, which now, if you look in hindsight, it's silly. Well, we fixed that problem. So
You still can't share information with them, though, just to let you know.
Yeah, and that's important. Lawyers helping lawyers is confidential. They're not part of the Virginia State Bar. They're independent. They're 501c3, and they are not controlled by the bar, and they are not part of the disciplinary process. They are very different. So what have I been doing this year? The first thing I did was I wrote an article for our Young Lawyers Conference on wellness. I have given a podcast, first podcast of my life. Yes, podcast. It was pretty cool with Sharon Nelson, who is a past president of Virginia State Bar, and Jim Galloway, who I believe is with the Oklahoma State Bar, on wellness. And they actually made me sound good. I was pretty impressed the first time I listened to that. So that is on the Legal Talk Network dealing with lawyer wellness. I gave a speech when I was sworn in. Most presidents, when they're sworn in, just thank people and say, here's what I'm going to do. I started that very moment talking about wellness. And during that meeting, we had invited some folks, some young law students to be there. Among them was Will Palmer, who came up afterwards at some point and said, Mr. Heath, I really liked your speech. It's inspirational. We'd like to publish it in the Regent Law Review. And I said, that's great. I'll have to write it. Because when I give talks, I have notes. I don't have articles. So we wrote it, and it's going to be published. And that is an article on why society should be concerned about lawyer wellness. We all understand why lawyers should be concerned, and clients and the loved ones of lawyers, but why should society be concerned about it? In addition, we have a Supreme Court a report that just came out, and it's entitled, it's a pretty ominous title, A Profession at Risk. And what this report does, and I was part of this committee, along with, I think it was 23 other attorneys and law professors and law deans and judges. What this does is, first and foremost, establishes permanent, reliable, and adequate funding for a JLAP program, a Judge Lawyer Assistance Program, that will be handled by lawyers helping lawyers. So for the lawyers in the room, you can expect about a $30 increase in your dues. That's coming straight from the court. The court has approved this, by the way, 7-0. And I have been told by the court this is a done deal. They have already gotten legislation lined up, and we'll be moving forward with that so that we have that funding. Also provides a couple of things that lawyers will have to voluntarily report whether or not you've had 1 hour of wellness credit in MCLE in the last 3 years. And when I say it's voluntary, if you haven't had it, there's no ramification to it, like the 12-hour requirement. If you don't do it, you lose your license, you get suspended. And also, we're going to be providing for free a portal for free wellness CLEs that any Virginia lawyer can log into and get as many CLE hours in wellness as they want. We're hoping that that will offset the $30 in the increased dues. So that gets me to the last thing, the thing that is really near and dear to my heart, and they just politely held up a 1-minute sign, and I'll try to do this in 1 minute. I enjoy going to the conferences nationwide talking about this, but I got tired of hearing people say, well, we need to treat anxiety, depression, and here's how you do it. And they're talking about medicine and doctors and whatnot. And I kept asking, but why? Why do we have these problems? And so I started taking notes about things that I thought might be the risk to the practice of law, and I ended up with 10, and then I had 14. Next thing you know, I had 20. And I did set up a panel of very highly qualified and esteemed attorneys and law professors, and Nat Gant's name kept coming up, and so I got Dean Gant on this committee, and we are now up to 24 factors that can cause these issues. And what we hope to do, well, not what we hope to, what we will be doing is preparing a matrix where it will show the factors, the risks. The next column will be for resources where you can go click on to articles talking about that, like vicarious trauma. It's on one of those 24 issues, and Katie's materials are in my materials. You can see how thorough that is. That's one of 24 risks. And then there'll also be a column for individual practice pointers so that you know what to do, and also firm practice pointers. And what I hope is that maybe 4 or 5 years from now, when the law students open up a professional responsibility textbook, there will be that matrix. Maybe not our matrix, but there will be a matrix that will show all of these risks so that you can do what my dad did before I went onto a construction site. He taught me how to set up a ladder. He taught me how to climb a ladder. He taught me how to get off a ladder, how to take down a ladder. Every time I operated a piece of equipment, he showed me all the safety features. He showed me how to use it. Circular saws are pretty dangerous. Drills. So every time I dealt with a piece of equipment, I was taught the risk of it. Compare that with what in the past we have done with lawyers. You pass the bar, and we say, good luck. That is going to change. And so that is why this is such a passion for me. And I am so happy to be here, particularly at the law schools, because that's where we've really got to start. But for the lawyers, the practicing lawyers here, I can promise you I am going to stay on this. The last thing I'll add is that I have the great pleasure. I just got an invitation to give a presentation at the University of Miami. Life is hard. It's going to be on February 28th. Think they're in Miami, February 28th, on lawyer wellness. Well, there will be a nationwide type discussion on this, so I'm very pleased with that invitation. I am always available to any lawyer that has any questions about the practice of law or the Virginia State Bar, and I am always happy to answer questions of law students. I'm glad to be here today. And I will be staying around for some of the presentations. If you have any questions, come just grab me. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much to Jim and Len for setting the stage, and I think it really rolls well into what I hope to convey to all of you. First of all, thank you for Regent for having me very much. Double check my PowerPoint here.
There you go.
Maybe it's my power button here. Good. All right. Technology, always the first step. As a trial lawyer, I know, get ready beforehand, practice it beforehand, never do it for the first time in the courtroom. So I come from Illinois, the Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism. Our branding name is To Civility, as you see up there. Feel free to peruse our website at tocivility.org so you can hear all about our types of programs and what we do. We're a very small office. We are 100% funded by our courts, just like the $30 fee. We have a $25 fee that funds our office 100%. So I like to say I went from private practice having a few hundred, maybe a couple thousand clients in my career to now I have almost 100,000 clients as registered lawyers in Illinois, is approaching 100,000. Just next week, we'll have another about 1,300 being sworn in Illinois. So it continues to trickle up and up and up and up. And I think you said 32,000 in here in Virginia. So I always like to hear kind of the layout of the land as we go across the nation. Today I want to talk about specifically professionalism and how mentoring can be a tool. I like how Professor Dean Gant set up the number 3 apprenticeship of professional identity. And I think mental health and wellness, they're very hot words right now in the legal profession, but in all industries really as part of mental health, physical health, and wellness being the proactive element to that. A lot of the work Jim does has been reactive over the years, I think, and now we're finally realizing we can put resources into proactive efforts and get a lot more done that way. That's kind of like my office. We have a huge disciplinary commission in Illinois because we're dealing with so many lawyers, but our office is more the proactive side of that. We're helping lawyers and law students and judges learn how they can avoid discipline, the ethical rules, what you must do, but also beyond that, what you should do, the professional aspect, the civility aspect, promoting your integrity. To set the stage a little bit for my talk, I want to talk about what the old model of the legal profession has looked like over generations, really. My father was a lawyer for 53 years, and I look at his career and what were the key performance indicators, the KPIs of how they measured success in the law profession, right? It's all about, well, hours billed, and that equated to profit, and that was the bottom line. And when you look at especially big law and middle-sized law firms across the nation, that's been the model. Very hierarchical structure, all about how many hours did you bill over the year, and that equated to your measurement of success. And really that's been a model that's been compared to competition versus cooperation. That's kind of the theme of my talk in a way. Competition over the years has said, well, it's almost been a zero-sum game. It's reaching that goal and competing with those in your office, and you can equate that to your law school experience. You operate on, usually most classes are a bell curve. There's a level of competition, and it's a zero-sum game to a degree. That's a fact. But in the real world, it doesn't really operate like that. It doesn't have to operate that way. There's a wonderful study, and there's a great TED Talk on it too, about the super chickens, and I think I put it in my materials. I wrote a blog post on super chickens. You're like, what are you talking about, Mark? Well, Professor Bill Murr from Purdue University did this study on productivity with chickens and how they could lay eggs and so forth, and he took groups of super chickens, the real egg layers, because that was real easy to measure. You just count the eggs, right? They were the super chickens, and let them breed with each other year after year, generation after generation of chickens. And after 6 generations, he compared them to the control group, which was the mediocre chickens. They produced eggs, they were healthy, they did a great job. So after 6 generations, he looked at the mediocre chickens, and they were doing well. They were actually producing more eggs than 6 generations ago. The control group was a success. And he looked at the super chicken group that were very competitive and doing a great job, or he looked at what was left of them. They pecked each other to death, most of them. There's about 3 left in that flock. And that's a demonstration of many elements of our society. What do? We pick the best of the best, and we give them all the resources and the power. And what do they, most of the time, generate from all that? They generate dysfunction, aggression, and waste. What's the alternative? Not competition, but cooperation. And that's kind of what I want to lead to. There's a great quote by, I think Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, competition is shown useful up to a certain point, but cooperation, the thing we should all strive for today, takes over or begins where competition left off. And so I want to talk about what does work, what is successful, and there's a great, and the TED Talk talks about this too, and I admit I'm blatantly stealing from it because it sets the stage for mentoring so well. What does work? Well, a controlled study of looking at how groups solve problems, it's like, what are the best attributes of that group? Is it the smartest people in the group? They do the best? No. Is it the group with the highest mean IQ? No, it's not them. It was always routinely 3 qualities of group behavior that stood out of successful problem-solving groups, and that's what we do as lawyers. We solve people's problems. They come to us usually when they have problems. Once in a while, the proactive, doing a will or something ahead of time, but most of the time, it's a bad or a troublesome situation. Number 1, those groups did best if they had high degrees of social sensitivity to others in the group, and they had a social science metric to measure that. Number 2, it was groups that allowed everyone in the group to have a voice. They didn't just have a leader take over and say, this is how it's going to work. And number 3, it was consistently the groups with the most women in them. And the researchers thought, well, maybe the first 2 are related and a function of the third, because typically, speaking in broad generalities, women tend to demonstrate those 2 qualities most often in groups. They stop and listen to others, give everyone a voice, and they allow others to have greater social sensitivity to the placement of others and realize the value of others bring to a conversation. Sounds a lot like cooperation, right? So it's no surprise. And I'm going to argue and not really argue, but clearly lay out for you the definition that mentoring is the ideal setup for such a situation. And it really starts in your kindergarten years. You look at these 5-year-olds, and this is the first time maybe you're out of your own comfort zone of your friends, or your only friends up to this point are your parents, your siblings maybe, and maybe your neighbors. But now you're dumped into a situation where for the first time in your life, you're interacting with others in a group situation, right? But this is just one generation. What do we do in the workplace now? We find multi-generations what we're working with day in, day out. I give a whole 1-hour CLE lecture on multi-generations in the workplace, and we have a great online CLE that anybody here can take too. It's available and open. Where we talk about the first time in human history. That's pretty remarkable that we have 4 generations, now going on 5 generations in the workplace, and this is beyond the legal profession. This is remarkable, and this is groundbreaking, and a lot of people don't just stop and recognize this and realize this is all about communication and working together, cooperation, and finding out how we can solve those problems for our clients better. But specifically, it really revolves around the biggest generation, and a lot of you in this room, I think, envelop this generation, the millennial generation. So let's look at that breakdown and look at some specific metrics real quick. I know this is very small, but what I'm trying to point out here is what I have highlighted throughout this curve. This is a distribution of generations by age, and within those generations, those different color codings are race. So this is a highlight of the baby boomer generation from 46 to 64. It's a general acknowledgement of when baby boomers were born, and their breakout where you have 76 million baby boomers in the US, 72% are white. So let's shift that over to the millennial generation, where we have the biggest generation that has overtaken the baby boomers. Of those 87 million millennials, just over half, 56, are white. And why do I point that out? Well, that's just one small metric to show the continued diversification of our society. And of course, how that has changed in the legal profession we'll look at in a second. But our nation is continuing to evolve down this path at a rapid pace. We have about 425 million people in this country right now. By 2050, we're going to be approaching 400 million people. And so that's an additional 75 million people in the next 20 so years. About half of those are going to be migrants. Maybe that'll change a little bit with immigration policies changing, but the point is we are a country that has continued to be diversified in all different ways, and not just by race, not just by nationality, but how we see other individuals identifying themselves and how those can work together in a group setting. I want to look specifically at the legal profession, as we're up to about 1.34 million lawyers in the United States as of this year, last I heard. But these numbers remain consistent. While we've seen about the last 4 or 5 years, I want to say, in law school setting, the gender distribution has been about 50-50. It's still about 65% male-based profession across the U.S. and very, very heavily based in white as far as race is concerned. But there's lots of ways we can define how we qualify somebody as a diverse community, a diverse profession, even a diverse workplace. And why is that important? Why does it matter? Well, our legal profession has always been a profession of leaders. That's why Shakespeare said we should kill all the lawyers first, because they wanted to eliminate the leaders. They wanted to eliminate function in society and create dysfunction. That's what that quote really means. A lot of people get that confused. Because our legal profession is made up of the great majority of our politicians, great majority of a lot of our business leaders have legal backgrounds. We are charged with being the problem solvers of our communities. It's important to have our profession look like the country that it serves, is my point. A lawyer's job is not just considering the black letter of the law, but knowing what's going on in society. How can we use problem-solving skills to address new and novel ways to solve problems for our clients? As we move from a product economy to an algorithmic economy, this is extremely important, especially to have those novel ideas from who? You, the millennials. You're the ones with those fresh, innovative ideas, and I argue that mentoring is a great platform to do so. I'm going to quickly go through some of the benefits of mentoring for new lawyers. Of course, those are pretty obvious. You're doing that transition from backpack to briefcase mentality. You're being introduced to the legal profession, both literally and personally and professionally, as you build that professional identity. And you're not just learning the substantive law, but you're also imparting what I like to call wisdom in a way, but learning experiences. It's not just how many years has someone practiced and that makes them a better lawyer by any means. It's also the experience they've gone through life, whether they've worked on a roof, whether they've been a police officer. Those are all extremely valuable attributes that I want to bring to my organization if I'm looking to hire somebody. And that's how you should market yourself as a new lawyer. And many of you do go right, a pipeline right from undergrad to law school, and there's nothing wrong with that. But also pepper your resume and your experiences with things that are outside. And you can do that very easily with volunteer opportunities and the like. But there's also, don't forget that the experienced lawyers are also being mentored by you. Yes, they're serving as the mentor, but reverse mentoring is always happening. We are learning from you. We are learning from the next generation of lawyers on how to do things better. And while we're renewing our own purpose and pride in our profession, we're learning more innovative ways on how to do that, and that has great value. And there's always that third party in the room, the profession itself. The profession is advancing itself as we're passing on those appropriate professionalism and civility attributes to the next generation of lawyers. And that's a hard thing to measure, right? It's hard to quantify such an ideal, but I'll give you one small example that shows it is working. Here's South Carolina's disciplinary sanctions. Before and after their mentoring program. These are lawyers disciplined in their first 5 years of practice or less. These are severe disciplinary cases in the past decade or so. Their program, which is one of the 7 mandatory mentoring programs in the United States, one of the biggest in South Carolina, they're started back in the mid to late 90s. They had about almost 30 incidents a year of disciplinary issues. And that dramatically dropped almost 95% down to less than 1 per year from 2012 when the program started to 2015 when this data was accumulated. So just a plummeting. Now, is it a direct correlation to the mentoring program to solving this? Not a directly correlated, but it certainly seems to have an influence on how lawyers behave and act. Real quickly, what's it look like on mentoring across the United States? Most states do have a formalized mentoring program. Of course, law firms and the like have been doing this for years before, but still it's a very novel concept in the legal profession, using mentoring as a direct tool. Yes, we've done it informally for years and told war stories and the like, but to have a structured system is what's important. In Illinois, where I'm from, it's a voluntary program, but we do it a little bit more than just teaching you substantive law. We based our curriculum on What we have in Illinois is the 5 tenets of PR, professional responsibility in Illinois. We're based on professionalism, civility, ethics, and then we have mental health, substance abuse. We don't have wellness directly in our Supreme Court rules, but we at our commission do directly mention wellness as part of that, and I hope to have the rule change just like that. I think that's important. And then number 5 is diversity and inclusion. And actually, we just started just last year, required CLE carve-outs. You must have 1 hour of diversity inclusion CLE, and you must have 1 hour of mental health substance abuse CLE. So it's not just an optional report option, which may be a stepping stone to a mandatory someday, but Illinois has pulled the trigger on making that a mandatory requirement. And to be frank, there's been pushback from that. But I think in the long run, it's the right thing to do. So we look at these generational differences and how they work together, and I just put the screen up there again to see both the top-down mentorship that happens, but also the bottom-up mentorship that happens, that reverse mentoring and the recognition that there are new ideas always working both ways. And so what does a mentoring program need to be successful? If you think of what constructs a positive, successful mentoring program, I want you to think of twisty straws. They need to be flexible, but they also need to be structured, okay? If you don't have structure, you're just gonna say, hey, I'll pair up a couple people, send them off, and they're just gonna tell war stories, and they're not gonna be very productive in their relationship and their conversations. But you also need to be flexible as well as structured. You want them to have flexibility in picking, well, what do we wanna talk about? Do we wanna go to a bar function together? Do we wanna watch litigation? Or I'm not interested in litigation, I wanna do transactional. Well, let's talk about our trust account and all these types of things and how those relate to the ethical rules, how they relate to professionalism and so forth. So we build a structured curriculum to let them follow a roadmap, but we also allow them to develop their own action items as they go through their relationship, and as it is in Illinois for a 1-year mentorship relationship that they earn free CLE credit for, which is great. And so the goals are constantly to have a dialogue, encourage that, have them have regular meetings, and have that two-way conversation throughout the year. And all this ties back to having a positive professional identity about how you are as a lawyer, how you carry yourself. And in turn, that's what clients want, and clients are demanding that more and more and more. And I'll end with pointing out a cardboard box for you. What do I mean by that? So the holidays are coming up, right? You're going to go to Thanksgiving and Christmas and all the other busy time with family and friends coming up, and you're going to have those questions. The majority of the room is law students. They're going to say, 1, how's law school going? And 2, they're going to say, what do you want to do when you're a lawyer? What do you want to practice, right? It's always going to be the what. And I put cardboard box up there, specifically an Amazon box, because Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, is always asked, hey, Jeff, what's going to be the next big thing in 10 years? What's going to change in 10 years? And Jeff's response recently was, I get asked that question all the time, and people want to know, but they never ask me what's not going to change in 10 years. And he says, if you can figure that out and build your model around that, then you might have something. He said, that's what's been the success of Amazon, really. It's very simple. It's 3 things at Amazon. It's price, delivery, and selection. That's it. And we've improved on those 3 things. So they've never changed, and they're not going to change in the next 10 years. No one's going to say, oh, I wish your prices were higher 5 years from now. No. Those things are repetitive. They're just improving all 3 of those things, if you think about it. It's very simple. The law profession is very similar. Things aren't changing in the law profession. What we're delivering hasn't really changed that much, and it's not going to change in the next 10 years. The how is changing exponentially. It's on fire right now. And people at the table like us and the thought leaders out there who are paying attention recognize this, but the far majority of lawyers are business as usual, head down, tunnel vision on the same repetitive tasks. And if you as lawyers can recognize the how to do things differently, and when you have that conversation with your family member or your friend on what are you going to practice, I want you to think of the cardboard box and think of yourself, well, it's not really what am I going to practice, it's how I'm going to practice that's going to be different. How are you going to set yourself apart from other lawyers? How are you going to succeed? And how are you going to use mental health and wellness as just one element of building that professional identity and make those tools successful to how you will achieve solving problems for your clients. And believe me, the clients will recognize that and they'll be back again and again. So thank you for listening to me.
And following speakers like that is a little difficult. So thank you so much for doing that to me. I do want to start off with, first of all, your lead-in was perfect, and that's probably the theme of my presentation, but from a little bit of a different angle. But before I get into my presentation, I want you to do me a favor. I walked around the halls of where the professors were, and I saw all the graduating pictures back from the 1990s and forward to now. And do you know every one of those pictures had smiles? There might have been 3 grumpy people in each year, but basically smiles. So what I want you to do, I know this is a serious issue. I want to look around and see a smile on every face. So come on, give it to me. Let's see a smile. All right. The thing that doesn't change at all does not revolve around the ideas we're going to give you about how to be healthy in the general sense. I'm going to warn you ahead of time, I am representing nobody but me. I am John Berry. I do not represent the Florida Bar that I'm very active in. I do not represent the American Bar Association that I'm very active in. And I agree completely with everything that's been said here. But I will take a little bit of a different tack because I can do that, and also because I'm at Regent Law School. I'm going to be talking about areas of the combination of the things that we talked about, resources or approaches that might be able to help you and others deal with these issues, and how it connects to lawyer regulation and ethics. But I'm also going to talk to you about none of us are immune. There's not one person here who is immune from the health and well-being issues, which then can lead to discipline issues. And I'll give you a little story as a second and a lead into that. But the context of what I'm going to talk to you about is faith. It's about the kind of faith that's connected to what you're learning here. And even when I give presentations to secular schools, I talk about the fact that we all have to find common denominators. As Justice Vesey said, he made a quote of saying that we're in search of the heart and soul of our profession. So in essence, we look for common denominators of how we practice, how we live our lives. But we don't give up on our commitment to our beliefs about eternal truth. And you haven't heard the word spoken or the name spoken, but you'll hear it in my presentation, and it's Jesus Christ. For those of us who are Christians, which are many in this school and myself, the idea or concept that you look very deeply into the ultimate kinds of values you have as a person affects your mental health. The thing that never changes is that we have to make decisions about those issues. And the ABA and that national task force even recognize it. I was shocked, to be honest with you, from a secular report. And the National Organization of Bar Counsel that I worked for 30 years was involved in setting this up, said that the definition of well-being, what are we talking about trying to reach, is a process in which lawyers strive for thriving in each dimension of your lives, any one of which, if it breaks down, your health is going to break down. Emotional, occupational, social, intellectual, physical, and can you believe they used the word spiritual at the end? Amazing. But by them, spiritual meant developing a sense of meaning in every aspect of your lives. So they recognize that that aspect of our lives is vitally important. The decisions you make in that area are vitally important to control where you go in the rest of your life. Give you an example, and I apologize for the students that were in the professor's office. This is about the only repeat you'll get, but I use a video in my presentations, and it has 5 lawyers, and you know the kinds that smile when they graduate across the board, and they gave reasons why they became lawyers. One was African American and said, I care about minorities. I'm going to do something for minorities. I want to make something of my life. Another one said that I am come from a poor background, and I want to help people that are poor. Another one came from a background of saying, I'm a woman, and I want to see that something special is done so that they can break through the ceiling. And all 5 of them had wonderful statements like that. And to show you how smart Regent students are, for the first time ever, I got the right answer to this question that I'm going to ask.
You're in a great place.
Yeah, I'm in a great place. And I asked, why did I show you that video? And they said, almost uniformly, people say, because I know you, John Berry, and you're going to make the pitch that you have to do something more than search for money. You have to do something special with your life. And I said, no, great answer. Wrong answer. I said, the reason I showed it is all 5 lawyers were disbarred. We took their licenses away from them. Disgrace, train wreck of life. And the issues that led to that had nothing to do with the substantive law of what your professors were teaching you. It was a breakdown in health and well-being. It was a breakdown of faith. It was a breakdown of who they were. One had, most of us in here who read the Bible believe it's God's word. Other than my mother-in-law, who believes it was grape juice, believed that you can have a glass of wine. Anybody have anybody in your family, by the way, that believes it was grape juice? Okay, we can discuss that later. But the bottom line is the Bible speaks about drunkenness. And this lawyer started off with a glass of wine. But as stress got greater, as they didn't follow some of the ideas that we've heard so well from these 3 speakers, it got worse, and it got worse, and became an alcoholic. Destroyed their career. That is a health and well-being issue. Another one decided they'd try a drug and got addicted immediately. That is both a character issue of starting down the line, but it is a disease issue of dealing with that issue from that point forward. Another one had a chemical imbalance. Wasn't their character, it wasn't how they dealt with life, but they did not get help from others. They did not network. They didn't have somebody that came to them and said, you know what, you need some help, and we're going to help you. But they isolated themselves, just as you said, and that happened. Another one did have a mental health issue that was not related to a chemical imbalance, didn't do with it. So what's the common denominator? Nobody of that group got disbarred because they didn't know the rule against perpetuities. And by the way, if anybody knows that rule, would you explain it to me? I've gotten 2 bar exams, and I passed them basically either because I didn't recognize the question, ignored it, and still got enough other questions right, or I was lucky enough not to get it. So let's go on a little bit with some concepts of tying together the themes of health and well-being as it affects how we practice, but how it affects our life, and connect it back, as I have said before, in a faith issue. We can't ignore the fact that whoever we are, we look back to our basic strengths. As a Christian, you look to the fact of prayer. You look to the power of the Holy Spirit. Now, if you're not a Christian, you might say, well, aren't you a discriminatory person and whatever? No, I'm saying to you, you have to decide what your power comes from and where it's at. And then we come together in love and talk to each other about all of these other issues. But what I will tell you is that that decision is the most important decision you'll have. Now, do I have some practical suggestions for you, no matter what your faith is, no matter what your issues or problems are? Yes, I gave you some materials and your backup materials. I would suggest you look at all of them, and I'll give you some other ideas. Emotional intelligence, I've got an emotional intelligence test for you. How many people have taken an emotional intelligence test? Okay, not a lot of you. Take the test. It's only 10 questions. It's used by Fortune 500 companies. I use it in who I hire. Of 10 questions, for those of you who only get 2 or 3 answers correct, I will give you my telephone number. Call me immediately. Immediately, I'll get you some help. For those of you that get 10 or more, it's a sign that you have all of these techniques, that you have emotional ability to deal with others, that you have, most importantly, self-awareness of who you are, where your emotions come from. And this is a vitally important component to health and well-being. It's also a vitally component of who you are as a person. So use that resource. Another resource available for you I have in the backup materials is a list of the kind of skills and attributes you students will need as you become lawyers. When I got my law degree, and I studied for it, and it was not when we used candles instead of electricity, but it was close. It was close. When I became a lawyer, we had a complete monopoly over the knowledge of the law, and we had a monopoly of how we get to the law. That was what was the power of being a lawyer. Nowadays, we have artificial intelligence. Nowadays, we have other factors which non-lawyers have knowledge of. We'll be competing with some of those people. So the importance is not only the law, But can they look to us as strong people? Can they look to us as people that we can trust? That is going to be the important strength that you're going to have and the competitive effort you're going to have. Backup materials I'll have as well. The 25 list, I studied this as a discipline council, areas in which Proverbs will tell you and show you that it's consistent with what I see in the discipline system. That if you rejoice when your enemies fall, ultimately it's going to come back and bite you. If you're quick-tempered. And by the way, being quick-tempered and anger is a strong sign that you're not right with your mental health, and it's a strong sign, a very strong sign, that if, as a Christian, you're not living up to the fruit of the Spirit. You are not being what you were born to be. So for those of you who see anger management issues, it's not just one little issue, it's a very important issue. I would, sometimes you get things laid on your heart and you want to share it. I heard Hian Lee, who's a dear friend of mine from Handong, and I taught over there, most spiritual place I've ever been. Also saw the CBN presentation yesterday. They both had a common theme. Success is not what you should be looking for. It isn't. It's obedience. It's obedience to God's word. It's obedience to things far beyond your individual success. I gave the students a little exercise. It's called Digging Deep. I think some of them filled it out for the day. I don't know. But what it asked them to do, I didn't pass out to you, is find the one thing in your life you need to change. What is the area of sin? What is the area of struggle that you have? And don't tell me you don't have it. We all do. And I asked them to look there and say, work on it. Deal with it. Don't let it grow. Don't become one of those attorneys that got disbarred. Start now to dig deep and find out who you are, what you are, and the areas that you need to be on. And I'll conclude with this. The legal profession, and when the legal profession moved stronger and stronger to self-actualization, and I think that's a lot of what the Carnegie report had this talk about, but they didn't say it in those terms. That when we look to our head knowledge, when we look to our own success, when we look to the fact that you can whip the other side, when we look to the fact that we put mask over our face, and every one of us have seen that, and that mask is the mask that we never see before the suicide. So when we move to self-actualization, and in my belief system, when we move away from Christ, when we move away from even the discussion of what's really the world about and our lives are about, and we focus on ourselves, we focus on our own feelings, and that's what I want to end about Regent Law School. I cannot tell you how proud I am, how much I appreciate the fact that I can come to one of the few schools in this country which recognizes the importance that the task force report talked about, the spiritual, and is not afraid to reach some conviction about it, not afraid to begin its classes with it, not afraid to challenge us to the most important fundamental issues to our health and well-being, because that decision will lead to all the other decisions you do. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be the cleanup hitter. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Very educational and inspiring. We very much appreciate it. We have a few minutes for questions, but I could pepper them with tons of questions, but I do want to get you all involved, and I see a hand already. I think we have individuals to pass the mic to you. Yes,
Hi, thank you for sharing. I'm a 3L, and I'm very grateful we're talking about this topic. I feel like in the last couple of years, I've seen a lot of what you've talked about. My question is, what practical steps can law schools take to proactively recognize and help students prior to that mental break? Thanks.
Well, I can say one thing that this law school does, and in conjunction with us, is we actually have a support group here that meets a couple times a month, the second and fourth Thursday, to basically talk about any kind of stress that you're having or any kind of issues that you might want to talk about in a safe, confidential place. I think schools, I've seen in the 15 years I've been doing this, things have gotten a lot better as far as that goes. But I think making people understand that getting help is a strength, not a weakness. And making people understand I mean, the more the staff understands how stressful law school is, or expresses to you how they understand how stressful law school is, and being open to your talking to them, that's the things that can happen. And I think that does happen in schools much more than it used to.
Yes, I'd like to add to that and add a little bit to my theme. There's another word we have not heard spoken from anyone for of us, and the word is love. The word is relationships. And why I mentioned that to you is that we so often, again, move toward the brain into the other areas. Every study that's been made is a study that relationships are important, that you have to have people that you can trust to talk to about your issues and go there. And again, my common theme, you have to have a faith to go to something beyond yourself. I moderated a panel for the annual meeting. It was our big panel, seemed similar to this at the annual meeting of Florida Bar. And at the very end, a lady stood up, similar to you, and said, okay, you experts, what do you do about your own life? What do you do about your health? And surprisingly, not surprisingly, and it was all good, one person said, I go to the gym every day, work out, makes me feel great. Another one says, I run like crazy. Another one says, I drink a lot of water. By the way, that is a good idea. My doctors have told me, drink a lot of water. And it got to me. And I said, I pray like the Dickens. I have to. I have to ask for help. Where do I need to go for help? Do I need to go to the gym somewhere? But I put prayer as my priority that tags me to everything else. So the starting point, no matter what your faith, is relationships. And if your faith, rely hard and fast to it. Thank you.
And I'll add a little bit to that because I agree with all the comments. And keep in mind that what Jim deals with, he deals with the folks that are heading toward impairment. But the wellness initiative is much larger than the impaired lawyer or the impaired law student. It's dealing with your own mental health, and most lawyers, most law students will never get to the point of being impaired, but they will have or suffer from the effects of some mental health issue with regard to the practice of law, and that's why the group I put together trying to identify those risks is so important. To answer your question, what can law schools do? Today is a prime example. The mere fact that you're talking about it, and you have folks coming in and who are concerned, and you do have professors who are worried about you not just as a lawyer, but as a person as a whole. The other thing that I would add to John's comments about relationships, most of the law classes, the law school classes here are small. And you're going to find when you look back that some of the best friends you've ever had in your life were through this experience. You need to be looking out for each other. Because I look back at my law school career and I learned more from my classmates than I learned from my professors. And I had really good professors. And so just to do a little bit of name dropping, I had folks like Trish West, Patricia, you know her as Dean West. I had Ben Madison, you know him as Professor Madison.
Or Mad Dog Madison.
Or Mad Dog Madison, yes.
He's not here, I can say that.
Yeah, I keep looking for him to walk through the door because he was my law review editor, and it puts just chills down my spine every time I think about that. But what you end up with is you have to look out for each other. And I saw a great commercial last night. It's the first time I've seen it. It was talking about, it starts out the awkward silence, and it shows a bunch of people struggling to say something. And then at the end of the commercial, they say, sometimes it's hard to say, are you okay? And that's what you need to start doing as law students for each other, because that's what you're supposed to do when you're lawyers too. We've had some legal ethics opinions that have come out talking about within law firms the duty of people practicing together to really be responsible for the wellness of the other people in the firm. And you should start that here. So probably said enough, but I think that that is terribly important.
I've said too much, but I've got to conclude with this one comment because I left it out of my remarks. It's a central part of a lot of what I said, and it connects to a class I saw by our moderator where he said to be bold and to be courageous about what you believe. It's interesting, even sometimes in a Christian setting, if you really hit hard at some things, people sort of, oh well, let's be careful now. And in the secular context, even more so, there's such a backing or whatever. There's a saying from a class that I teach in church. It says, do you really believe what you believe is really real? I'll repeat that. Do you really believe what you believe is really real? We all have to look at that. Wherever our conclusion takes us, a journey takes us, do you really believe in Christ? Or do you really believe in the Bible? Or do you really believe in another set of values that get you to? And then we'll discuss them, and then we'll find our common denominators. But really study and feel what your foundation is, because that foundation is going to get you through all of this other mess. It's going to give you a strength. It's going to give you an ability to deal with rough circumstances. And then it's going to lead you to every one of the wonderful ideas we have gotten across the board. The difference of our generations and how we approach these issues, the problems once we do have a problem, and the leadership, a great leadership in Virginia to try to see step by step what do we need to fix along the way. But fixing along the way also means you have to fix your central core of who you are and what you're about and what you believe. Thank you.
If I could just put a plug in for Mr. Leffler's sessions that he mentioned. It's a blessing that we're able to have those here at Regent for him to come and share the wellness sessions. And to go back to the question, one thing that I receive a lot of promotional materials in the mail about what other law schools are doing. And I think this group would be interested to know that wellness is a very hot topic. And I just actually brought down with me a journal from SMU Law School in Texas about their wellness week. So there are a lot of law schools, thankfully. I mean, I think that hopefully we're doing some good efforts here, but at other law schools as well to address this issue. So let's thank our panelists again for our first session. Thank you very much.